On a Saturday morning in March of 1983, at the Porter County Equipment Auction in Valparaiso, Indiana, a 29-year-old mechanic named Ray Hollister made what everyone agreed was the stupidest purchase of the day. He paid $350 for a 1951 Diamond T201 wrecker that hadn't run in 14 years. The wrecker sat at the far end of the auction lot, separated from the respectable equipment like a leper at a church social. Forest green paint had faded to a sickly primer gray. The tires were flat and cracked. The boom was frozen at a 30-degree angle, seized solid with rust. Someone had spray-painted "dead" across the hood in white letters 3 feet tall. The auctioneer almost didn't call it. Right, folks, last item of the day. 1951 Diamond T wrecker. Sold as is, where is? This one's from the Mackenzie estate. Been sitting behind a barn since 1969. Probably good for scrap weight. Do I hear 200? Silence. Come on, somebody needs scrap metal. 100. More silence. A few men shifted their feet. One laughed. $50 just to get it off the lot. Ray raised his hand. 50. The auctioneer looked relieved. I have $50. Do I hear 75? A voice from the back. You got a sucker at 50. Take it before he sobers up. Laughter rippled through the crowd. $50 going once. Ray's voice again. 350. The laughter stopped. Then started again, louder. Son, the auctioneer said, you just bid against yourself by 300. I know what I bid, the auctioneer said quickly before Ray could raise it to $700. To the young man in the blue jacket, God help you. That's when Phil Denning found him. Phil was the owner of Denning Tow Service, the biggest towing operation in 3 counties. He ran 12 modern wreckers, had contracts with the state police and half the auto dealers in northwest Indiana. He wore a bright red satin jacket with his company name embroidered in gold across the back, drove a new Silverado with a car phone, made more money in a month than Ray made in a year. Phil walked over to where Ray stood filling out his payment slip and started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, a full, belly laugh that turned heads across the auction yard. Hollister, Phil said loud enough for everyone to hear. I just watched you pay $350 for a wrecker that's been dead since Nixon was president. Ray didn't look up from his paperwork. Yes, sir. Do you know what $350 could have bought you? A down payment on a real wrecker, something that actually runs. Hell, I've got a '78 Ford I'd sell you for $4,000. Runs perfect. Ready to work tomorrow. Fix this one. Phil laughed harder. Fix it. Son, that Diamond T hasn't turned over in 14 years. The engine's probably seized solid. The boom's rusted shut. The transmission's full of mice. You'd need $5,000 in parts and a year of Sundays just to get it to cough. I can fix it. You can't. Phil stepped closer, lowering his voice to something that was probably meant to be fatherly but came out patronizing. Listen, Ray, your daddy was a good wrecker man. God rest him. But you're 29 years old, working out of a 2-bay shop with no contracts and no capital. And you just spent $350 on a truck that ain't worth $35. That's not business, that's stupidity. Ray looked at Phil Denning, at his red jacket, at his gold watch, at his confident smile. My daddy taught me something, Mr. Denning, Ray said quietly. He said the worst thing a man can do is let other people tell him what's possible. He walked past the dealer toward his rusted purchase, leaving Phil standing there with his mouth open. Behind him, Ray could hear the laughter spreading through the crowd. Let me tell you about Ray Hollister, because to understand what happened next, you need to understand where he came from. Ray was born in 1954, the only son of Thomas and Marie Hollister. Thomas had run Hollister Recovery Service in Porter County for 22 years. A 1-truck operation, honest work, enough to get by but not enough to get ahead. He taught Ray everything: how to rig a pull, how to read a frame, how to feel when a winch cable was about to snap. Thomas died in 1979 when his wrecker was rear-ended on I-65 during a recovery. Ray was 25 years old, suddenly responsible for a business with 1 aging truck, a 2-bay garage with a mortgage, and a town full of memories. The truck, a 1967 Holmes 440, died 6 months later. Transmission failure. Ray couldn't afford to fix it, couldn't afford to replace it. He sold it for scrap and kept the shop doing mechanical work, barely surviving. For 4 years, Ray worked on other people's trucks while the tow contracts went to Phil Denning and the other big operators. He saved what he could, learned what he could, waited for a chance. When he heard about the Porter County auction and the equipment from the Mackenzie estate, something told him to go. He didn't know anything about the Mackenzies. Just that old man Mackenzie had run a small wrecker service in the 50s and 60s, died in 1969, and his widow had moved to Arizona, leaving everything behind. Ray didn't know the wrecker's history. He just knew that a Diamond T201 was one of the toughest medium-duty wreckers ever built, and that $350 was all he had. What he didn't know was that somewhere in that rusted cab was a secret that had been waiting 32 years to be found. Let me tell you about the first 6 months, because that's when most people would have given up. Ray borrowed a flatbed from a friend and hauled the Diamond T back to his shop. It took 4 men to winch it onto the trailer because the wheels wouldn't turn and the brake drums were seized. When they finally got it into Ray's garage, Phil Denning's words seemed prophetic. The engine was locked solid. 14 years without running had turned the oil to tar and welded the pistons to the cylinder walls. The boom pivot was frozen with rust. The winch drum wouldn't rotate. The wiring was a disaster. The frame had rust through in 3 places. Ray spent the first night just staring at it, wondering if he'd made the worst mistake of his life. Then he remembered what his father used to say: every broken machine is just a puzzle. You solve it one piece at a time. First piece was the engine. Ray pulled the head in April. The cylinders were scored but not destroyed. The crank had surface rust but no deep pitting. The block was solid. Someone years ago had done something unusual. They drained the oil and filled the crankcase with a preservative compound before parking it. That's why the bottom end wasn't completely destroyed. By July, Ray had the engine apart completely. Every night after work, every weekend, he cleaned, measured, sourced parts. He learned to bore cylinders without a proper machine. He fabricated what he couldn't buy. He studied manuals from the 1950s that he found in library archives. The neighbors thought he was crazy. Phil Denning drove by once, saw Ray elbow-deep in the engine block, and honked his horn, laughing. Word spread around town. Ray Hollister's trying to resurrect a dead Diamond T. That boy's lost his mind. Ray heard it all, and kept working. By winter 1984, he had a rebuilt engine. By spring 1985, he had the boom freed and moving. By 1986, the wrecker started. It took 3 years from purchase to first start. 3 years of being laughed at. 3 years of people saying it couldn't be done. When Ray turned the key that April morning in 1986 and the old Diamond T engine roared to life for the first time in 17 years, he sat in the cab with tears running down his face. Let me tell you about the next 16 years, because that's where the real story lives. From 1986 to 2002, Ray Hollister ran Hollister Recovery Service with that 1951 Diamond T. He didn't buy a new truck. He didn't expand. He just worked. The Diamond T became known in Porter County. The old green wrecker with HOLLISTER Recovery repainted on the doors. Slow, reliable, always showed up. Ray built a reputation. If the big companies couldn't do it, call Ray. If it was too difficult, too dangerous, too complicated for the modern hydraulic wreckers, the old Diamond T could handle it. In 1989, he pulled a grain truck out of a sinkhole that Phil Denning's New Century wrecker couldn't touch. The ground was too soft for the heavy modern rig. The Diamond T's lighter weight and manual winch worked where hydraulics failed. In 1993, he recovered a car from a frozen lake. The ice wouldn't support a big wrecker. Ray drove the Diamond T onto the ice, rigged a long pull system, and brought the car out. Every time, people were surprised. Every time, the old wrecker proved them wrong. By 2002, Ray was 48 years old. The Diamond T was 51. And Phil Denning, now running 18 wreckers and thinking about retirement, still occasionally made jokes about Ray's antique museum piece. Then came the day Ray found it. It was a Saturday in October 2002. Ray was doing routine maintenance, replacing a rusted cab panel on the driver's side. The original metal had finally rusted through after 51 years, and Ray had fabricated a replacement patch. When he removed the old panel, he saw something that shouldn't be there. Behind the cab wall, welded to the frame rail, was a metal box, not a factory part. Someone had fabricated it specifically, sealed it, welded it into a space where nobody would find it unless they were rebuilding the cab. Ray's heart started pounding. He got a cutting torch and carefully removed the box. It was about 12 inches long, 6 inches wide, made of quarter-inch steel plate. Heavy, sealed with industrial solder. He took it to his workbench and opened it with a chisel. Inside was a leather satchel. Inside the satchel was a stack of papers wrapped in oilcloth. And a letter. The letter was dated November 15, 1951, written in careful handwriting to whoever finds this. My name is James Mackenzie. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead, and someone finally took this old diamond T apart enough to find what I hid. Let me explain. In August 1951, I bought this wrecker new from the diamond T dealer in Gary. Paid $3,100 for it, every cent I'd saved in 10 years. I was 32 years old, had a wife and 2 kids, and I was going to build a towing business that would take care of my family for generations. 3 months later, in November 1951, I did something I've regretted every day since. There was an armored car robbery in Hammond. $47,000 stolen from a Federal Reserve shipment. 2 guards shot. The robbers escaped in a stolen truck, heading south on Route 41. I was driving home from a recovery when I saw a truck broken down on the shoulder near Couts. 2 men standing next to it, waving for help. I stopped. That's what you do. When I got out, I saw the canvas bag in the truck bed. I saw the money spilling out of it. I saw the guards' uniforms they'd tried to hide. They pulled guns on me, told me to get in my wrecker and drive them south. Told me if I did what they said, they wouldn't kill me. I drove them 40 miles. Near Rensselaer, they made me stop. They took most of the money and ran into the woods, but they left behind 1 bag. In the confusion in the dark, they didn't count right. I found $8,300 in that bag. Cash. Federal Reserve notes. All of it stolen. I should have driven straight to the police. I know that, but I thought about my kids, my mortgage, the wrecker payment. I thought about how that money could change everything. I kept it. The FBI caught the 2 robbers 3 days later in Kentucky. They had $31,000 on them. The news said the remaining $16,000 was never recovered. The investigation closed. The money was written off, but I couldn't spend it. Every time I looked at it, I saw those guards' faces in the newspaper. One of them died from his wounds. The other was paralyzed, so I made a decision. I would keep the money until I could figure out how to return it without destroying my family. Maybe anonymously send it back. Maybe donate it in a way that helped the victims, but I never found the courage. And I couldn't bring myself to spend blood money on my children, so I hid it. Welded it into this wrecker. Thought maybe someday I'd know what to do. Now I'm dying. Heart disease. Doctor says maybe 6 months. My wife doesn't know about the money. My kids don't know. Nobody knows but me. I'm leaving this letter because whoever finds it deserves to know the truth. The money is yours now. But I'm also leaving documents, Federal Reserve serial numbers, newspaper clippings, the names of the guards. You can keep the money. You can return it. You can do whatever your conscience tells you. All I know is I couldn't live with it. Maybe you're stronger than me. God forgive me. James Mackenzie. November 15, 1951, Ray sat in his shop, holding a letter written 51 years ago by a dead man, and started counting. The money was still there. $8,300 in 1951 Federal Reserve notes, wrapped in oilcloth, perfectly preserved. Also in the box, photocopies of newspaper articles about the robbery, a list of serial numbers. A Western Union receipt showing an anonymous $1,000 donation to the family of the guard who died, dated 1952, evidence that James Mackenzie had tried in some small way to make it right. Ray sat there until dark thinking. Let me tell you what Ray did because it matters. The first thing he did was research. He found the FBI files from 1951. The case was closed. The statute of limitations had passed decades ago. The Federal Reserve had written off the loss in 1952. The guard who survived was named Martin Sawyer. He'd been 28 in 1951, paralyzed from the waist down. Ray found his obituary from 1987. He died at 64, never fully recovering from the injury. Martin had a daughter. Her name was Patricia Sawyer Chen. She was 54 in 2002, living in Michigan, working as a nurse. Ray called her, told her the whole story. Sent her photocopies of everything. "Your father was a hero," Ray said. "And James Mackenzie spent 18 years trying to figure out how to make it right. He just ran out of time." Patricia cried on the phone, not about the money, about finally knowing the full story of what happened to her father. Ray sent her $8,300, the original bills, wrapped in their 51-year-old oilcloth. Patricia donated it to a fund for families of wounded armored car guards. The story made the newspapers in November 2002. 51-year secret discovered in vintage wrecker. Phil Denning read it at breakfast and nearly choked on his coffee. He drove to Ray's shop that afternoon. His red jacket was gone. He wore a plain gray windbreaker, looked older, tired. "Ray," Phil said, standing in the doorway, "I need to say something." "Was under the Diamond T changing oil. Go ahead. I laughed at you. In 1983 at that auction, I called you stupid for buying this truck. You did. I was wrong." Ray slid out from under the wrecker and stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "About what?" "About everything. That truck. That $350. I thought I knew what made a good towing operation. New equipment, big contracts, volume, but you built something I never did." "What's that?" "A legacy. That wrecker's got a story now. People know its name, they know yours. And you did the right thing with that money when a lot of men wouldn't have." Phil paused. "I've got 18 trucks. None of them will ever matter the way that Diamond T matters." Ray looked at the old wrecker, at the faded green paint, at the repainted door, at the boom that had saved dozens of vehicles over 51 years. "It was never about the truck, Phil. It was about what you do with it." Hollister retired in 2019 at 65. The Diamond T201 is still running, now operated by his son Michael, who learned to drive it at 16. The wrecker has been featured in 3 museums, 2 documentaries, and 1 book about vintage recovery vehicles. James Mackenzie's letter is framed in Ray's shop, next to a photo of Martin Sawyer in his guard uniform. Phil Denning sold his company in 2005. 18 modern wreckers, sold to a national chain. None of them are still in service, but that 1951 Diamond T still rolls out on calls, still pulls vehicles nobody else can reach, still carries the name Hollister Recovery on its door. And every time someone asks Ray about the $350 he spent in 1983, he gives the same answer. "Best money I ever spent. Bought me a truck, a business, and a man's conscience delivered 51 years late." Some people laughed when he bought junk, but the junk was carrying a secret heavier than any vehicle it ever recovered. And it took 19 years, a rusted cab panel, and 1 stubborn mechanic to finally bring it home. The dealer laughed at the wrecker. The wrecker had the last word.